Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Opera Lafayette Salon series. I'm Patrick Quigley, Artistic Director of Opera Lafayette. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is our second salon of the season, and these evenings allow us to get closer to the artists' ideas and rep behind the work that we put on stage. Tonight, we're going to get to know the curator, host, and master of ceremonies for our upcoming program, Queen of Hearts, which will be presenting February 12th in Washington, D.C., and February 14th on Valentine's Day in New York City. In addition to some great music and musicians, we'll also be collaborating with some great culinary friends. In D.C., the evening will feature wines curated by Sarah Thompson, the Michelin Guide D.C. Sommelier of the Year from Queen's English in D.C. And in New York, Alex Dominguez of Calico Bar will be creating bespoke cocktails just for the evening. So please come thirsty in every sense of the word. You can find full details and tickets at operalafayette.org. Also, at the end of tonight's discussion, we'll leave time at the end for questions. So please feel free to drop them into the chat as we go along. And the members of the Opera Lafayette staff will put them into our script, and we will get to them at the end, and I'll pass them along to Nic. And which brings us to the reason we're here tonight. Our guest tonight is a giant in the field of period performance practice. Nic McGegan is a conductor, scholar, and one of the great musical personalities of our time. He has led most of the major international ensembles across the world and has been artistic director of many as well. He has shaped how many of us hear Baroque and classical music, and just as importantly, how much joy, wit, and humanity we allow into it. Nic, welcome to the Opera Lafayette Salon series.
Thank you very much indeed.
Uh, we're
Um,
we're very happy that you're making your Opera Lafayette debut this
Absolutely.
coming week.
And I am, just so that people know, I'm actually talking in Berkeley, California. So I'm on the other side of the country where the sun is still shining. And I hate to tell you that it's beautiful and warm.
Yes, well, we'll get there at some point,
You
hopefully
will.
in next
Yes.
few months. So, well, if it's okay with you, I'd like to start at the beginning and let our folks get to know you a little bit. Not even so much with the career version of you, but as the young musician. And I think I read somewhere that you grew up in a household of visual artists, not musicians. Do you feel that your early exposure to the fine arts shaped how you hear music or even how you conduct?
Well, it was certainly much easier, I found, not having musical parents. They liked music, that's just neither of them played. It meant that I didn't have the problem of a father or a mother coming in and say, "No, it doesn't go like that, dear. It's a B flat. Play it now and use the second finger." On the other hand, if I tried to draw a circle, my mother could draw a perfect circle and couldn't understand why mine looked like a slightly distressed donut.
Oh my
So,
God.
but my family in the 18th century were musical. I have a series of cathedral organists back then, from about 1790 to for about 100 years, actually. So there's music in there. It's just that their progeny all turned out to be painters.
Wow. For you, how did you, I mean, what are your first musical memories? How did it become your sort of artistic output with some painter parents?
Well, my grandmother had a piano, a grand piano, which was very nice, which she didn't really play, but other relatives did. And I was drawn to that. Uh, we would, of course, listen to a lot of music on the BBC, on what was called the third program then, and they had whole operas and everything. So I always liked that, um, and so I think I probably at about the age of 4 or 5 asked if I could learn the piano. Maybe I was told I would learn the piano. I don't remember. Um, and anyway, I took to it like a duck to water. And about 3 or 4 years later, after that, when I was about 8 or 9, I picked up the flute, which is an instrument you can't play until you're about that age because your hands aren't big enough. And no, shall I say, no self-respecting parent wants to teach their kid the piccolo.
I sort of,
Much
yes.
too squealy. And the great thing about the flute, I have to say, is that the worse you are, the less sound you make. Unlike, say, the oboe or the trumpet, which is not so much a question of learning as taming.
Yes.
Because you're really bad, you make an enormous noise, and your job is to try to get it to be softer. The flute just sounds like blowing across the top of a beer bottle, and that doesn't make much. Pianos, of course, you can't be out of tune on a piano unless the piano is out of tune. So it even if you're not playing very well, it still sounds better than, say, the violin, which is it sounds as if you trodden on a cat
Yeah.
when you're a kid. So I was very lucky. I was in a My parents moved from the south of England up to the middle of England, and I went to preparatory school up there, which had music in it, and music. I was immediately seconded to a piano teacher, um, and the rest. I wouldn't say the rest is history, but I spent my time up until I went to university happily playing piano and flute, and also I thought that I might try to compose, but I found that rather solitary. And as an only child, solitary was I looked for things to do with friends rather than be all alone on myself. So the composition sort of went by the wayside after I left university, actually. And the great thing about both the flute and the piano is that they're very social instruments. Uh, Piano, obviously, you might play on your own, but you play with violinists, you can play chamber music, you can play piano duets. The flute is at its best, I think, in an orchestra or a band. So you have a whole team of ready-made friends, as it were, and that's an enormously exciting thing. People go on now about how great team sports are building camaraderie, but I've orchestras and music making and choral singing is just as great in my view.
Absolutely. Now, I've been to your house a few times, and you also have a number of harpsichords around. When did you start playing that instrument?
At university,
Okay.
so when I was 19, uh,
Okay.
there weren't that many of them around when I was a kid. My school didn't have one, for example, but at university they had them. A lot of them were originals, of course, in those days. And so it wasn't really till my second year at university that I started to play the harpsichord.
Mhm.
Um, but by that stage, um, I was already going off the boil as wanting to play the piano as a sort of solo person. I love playing chamber music and still do, but the idea of playing uh, huge Brahms sonatas and Rachmaninoff and things lost its appeal. And
You,
so the great thing about harpsichord is that a lot of the very best music is written to be played with other people. Plus, you get to play in an orchestra as continuo, and I love doing that too. So
is a so and I believe you did not go to conservatory for university. You went to, was it Cambridge and Oxford for your
I,
higher level training?
I went to both.
Okay.
Um, so in England, they have what's called the boat race, which is when Oxford plays Cambridge. I can support both sides.
It's
Very convenient. So I always win or I always lose, depending on how you look at it. I
could,
went to Cambridge first, and I had a wonderful, wonderful time. My teacher was a, a fellow called Sir David Wilcox, who ran King's College Choir, and if I had to say that he wasn't the best teacher I'd ever had in my life, it was only because since he never really made a mistake, he couldn't really understand why other people did too.
it's
It's very
incredible.
helpful if you actually have messed up, so you can understand why other people do the same as you did. Um, but he was a wonderful man, and music making at Cambridge, you don't have to do anything at Cambridge. You can attend any lecture you like in any department or not. All the teaching is private. And so one-on-one, and I had some wonderful, absolutely wonderful teachers. David Wilcox taught me harmony and counterpoint, and that has kept me in good stead. You play, you don't do anything for credit. You play because you want to, and it was just a terrific orchestra. I played in all of them over the time. I ran the opera company for a while. It was just a marvelous place and full of wonderful people. There was a slightly reclusive cellist at Trinity College, whom I only met a couple of times, and his name was Prince Charles. Um, he was a year ahead of me, but I nearly had to conduct him once, which was a little scary because I couldn't really say, "Excuse me, Your Majesty, you're flat," and then find that my head had been lopped off from my neck. But I saw him at a couple of parties, and there's lots of very good people around. And the great thing about a university, of course, is that you meet people who are not reading music. They're doing other subjects, sometimes wildly different subjects, but you all get together to talk about things. So I found that very useful rather than going to conservatory, which I never did. I've taught at conservatory, but never actually been there. Oxford was pretty much the same, and one of my pals there was Dame Joan Glover, uh, famous conductor who lives in Chicago, works in Chicago, and we were the wild boy and girl, I guess. I lent her my motorbike at one point. I had a very small little French onion seller's motorbike, which she borrowed for a year. Um, so great friendships are made at university, and I was very happy that I made a lot. Still keep in
And
touch with them, even after 60 years. So
really,
50
that
years, 50 years.
and so did your love of earlier music and the idea of performance practice get into you while you were at Cambridge and Oxford, or was that afterward?
It was very much at Cambridge. One of the courses that you have to do there or pass an exam in is acoustics, how instruments work, why concert halls sound good or why they don't. And I was not very good at that. Um, the architecture bit I was fine because my father was an architect, so I understand how to read building plans and things. But so I went to the teacher, who was a fantastic guy called Sir Nicholas Shackleton. His actual job was that he knew what the climate was like 100,000 years ago. But his passion was collecting old wind instruments. And so I would go around to his house and say, he'd say, well, of course, this is how a violin works, da di da di da. And then he said, but I've just got this new flute. Do you want to give it a try? And it was, a real 18th century flute. And he said, well, I've got about five or six others. Would you like to borrow one? So I said, sure. And so I got to borrow uh, a George Astor flute, which was made about
Oh,
1770. And and then at some point he said, well, you haven't met the tenant, have you? He's lived upstairs, but he's away most of the time, working with an early music group. But his name is Christopher Hogwood, and he's got the harpsichord. He owns the harpsichord that you can see in the living room. So I'll introduce you when he comes home. And so I got introduced to him, and we played uh, piano, flute and harpsichord sonatas. Me having read some of the fingerings the night before just to make sure. Uh, and then we played duets and then he said, "Well, this is you're playing the harpsichord like a piano. You're hitting it too hard, and it's a very old instrument, so please don't do that." Uh, and then when I left Cambridge, I joined his group, the Academy of Ancient Music, and played in the first recording they ever made, actually. I was second flute in that. So that's where I got the bug, if you like. And it really, the orchestras that later became famous, the English concert with Trevor Pinnock, John Eliot Gardner, Roger Norrington, they were all sort of getting going around 1970. So I'm the sort of second generation, if you like.
mm.
Most of those ones, well, Roger Norrington died this last year. He was just over 90, I think. John Elliott's 80, and I'm just turned 76. So I'm a little bit younger than some of them. Uh, Trevor Pinnock is 82. So it's 80 as well, I should say. And I played in all their orchestras. So that was an incredibly exciting time because we were doing a lot of performances of music that hadn't been done on period instruments since the stuff was written several hundred years before. And that was very, very thrilling, actually.
That really must have been amazing, sort of matriculating university into that scene, sort of immediately as a professional. I mean, what were the sort of discussions and challenges going on at that time between people who wanted to play historical music in a more authentic way?
Well, there were a lot of people who played in symphony orchestras who thought we were crazy uh, and didn't like us at all. Uh, and on the other side, I must say, some of the early musicians were a little bit hoity-toity. and saying, we do this the way Bach would have wanted it, or uh, as opposed to the symphony or whatever. It's all rubbish, of course, because we don't know. But the main thing is there's also a clash between the people who'd been to college, music conservatory, and the people who'd been to university. We university types were looked upon as stuffy and snobbish, and the other ones were, and the conservatory people were sort of like real musicians. Um, the interesting thing about the how we played is, of course, I'm not sure we played terribly well, but we didn't give very many concerts because the main thing we did was to record. And recording was done in very small units and it's infinitely correctable. So we would make lots of mistakes and people would come along with scissors and cut the tape and get the good ones. Um, and what used to happen is that recordings essentially were sponsored largely by Decca and EMI and people like that from the profits from the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and everybody else. Now record companies, CEOs take all that money and go to Bermuda and have holidays. But they plowed it back in those days, they plowed it back into the business for the less profitable side of it. And it was also, and get news out of it too. And so we'd often be recording all week, and then maybe we give a concert at the end of it, maybe not. But it often was recording both first. And then, of course, the recordings are, these are LPs at this stage. The LPs then are played on the radio. So lots of people hear it, perhaps more people than, well, certainly more people than could have heard a concert, which maybe was for 1,000 people. There may be 300,000 people listening on the radio. And so people like Chris Hogwood and Trevor Pinnock and all my pals became household names. We made the CDs. People got used to the soft sound of period instruments.
Mhm.
And all that continued while I was at Oxford, which was, I was actually studying very opera Lafayette. I was actually studying Philidor, who is a French composer of
Yeah.
opéra comique. And I never finished my thesis because I was too busy playing, but uh, I had a great time not researching it. But I conducted quite a few of his operas
Mhm.
over the years. And I think he's a great composer.
He is. He is. We have in fact done a number of his works as in the course of our 30 years.
Sure.
So as a member of these groups, I mean, were you trying to overturn tradition in any way, or just understand how music worked differently? What was your why at that point?
Well, we did enjoy reading the treatises. We couldn't have to take lessons from anybody because there was nobody to teach us. So we had to read the book and then have a go. Luckily, the treatises were in libraries, which we could easily get. And I lived at Oxford or Cambridge, so there's infinite numbers of old books that we could read. We did it just by trial and error, really. Harpsichords, there's a longer tradition. But then we were, um, we did uh, experiment a lot with repertoire. Uh, Back in the day, the 70s, that we know that Haydn, say, wrote 104 symphonies, but there were only about 10 of them that were ever played by a modern orchestra, usually the ones with names. So we could go back and say, well, let's try some of the others. Uh, and this also was a spur for people to publish and to produce new editions of things. There was a lot of music which a lot of, as I call them, modern musicians couldn't read. Music for the viola da gamba, for example, in very weird clefs. It was there in the libraries in print, but nobody had tried to play it, and people did. Uh, so that was great fun. We There was also a thing which I think was very stupid, which was called sort of the Battle of the Bands, which was to pit a modern orchestra or a modern chamber group against a period one, and the audience could decide which they liked best.
Really?
But I mean, the silly thing is that you can give a good or a bad performance on period instruments and or on modern instruments. So I remember having to do one with I think it was either the G minor or the E flat Mozart piano quartet, which we did, funny enough, at Santa Fe Chamber Music Festival. I played the piano in the period one. I forget who, because we didn't hear each other. So, and the audience, I don't know who won. Maybe we both did, because we should have both won, really, because it's just a very different experience. Uh, but I should say that there's nothing wrong about playing things on period instruments or on modern instruments. It's how well you play it and whether you've got good ideas to make it an exciting experience for the audience. Um, but it's nice. There wasn't as much experimentation, I would say, with the modern orchestra players. I felt it was a little bit, or we felt perhaps, that it was a little bit like cheap gloves, one size fitted all. You could play Mozart like Tchaikovsky, like Bach,
Mhm.
or like Stravinsky. You just played it with the same amount of vibrato. You didn't really care. And you certainly didn't care what it might have sounded like when it was written.
Mhm.
That's a fairly new concept. Uh, and one of the things that's interesting about the performance practice movement, if you want to call it that, is it wasn't driven by players, it was driven by composers. It was Brahms who had a great big interest in Couperin. It was Webern who liked medieval music and tried to get it performed. It was Benjamin Britten who liked Purcell. Uh, Peter Maxwell Davies liked music of the 16th century. Uh, they're the ones who did a lot of putting it out and would ask us to play it because they found that music fascinating and it inspired them to write their own music.
So
Musicians tend to play for for the next fee.
sure. So you you sort of taught yourself from the treatises. So does that, does that engender an idea of exploration or dogmatism? Like, do you take those treatises as dogma and work with them, or how does it what was that experience? Because I come from a different time where we sort of learn in our performance practice class what
Yeah. Well, you have to know how to read a treatise. If somebody says, on no account must you ever do this, you know perfectly well that they did. Otherwise, there would be no point in saying it.
right.
Treatises don't all agree.
Mhm.
They
Right.
might as to how to finger a B flat on a flute, but not always. Uh,
Mhm.
you have to take it all with a little grain of salt, I suppose, but also uh, the treatises will tell you, for example, that a B flat is not the same as an A sharp, and they have different fingerings. And you
Mhm.
could say, but they have this, it's the same note on the piano. And then you could say, ah, yes, but it wasn't in the 18th century. And then you can say, well, why is that? And what does that do? That becomes very interesting. So we now play in orchestras at a particular pitch, A4, 40, 41, and we play usually an equal temperament. Well, neither of those were used back in Bach's day or in the 17th century, even in most of the 19th century. So you go back and you can say, well, what pitch did they play at? What temperament did they use? So it is a sense of experimentation. And luckily, uh, universities got on the bandwagon, as did conservatories. Um, Really to teach this stuff. I was a professor at the Royal College of Music when I was 23, teaching 18th century flute because people wanted to learn, and I was a sort of an adjunct to the flute department, which
Mhm.
was great. And they already had a harpsichordist there and an organist and so on. So and then we got a Baroque orchestra together in about 1974, which is a long time ago if you think about it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was all great fun, and that was in the sense of experimentation.
Mm.
And there are always violinists, shall we say, who love to learn different styles of playing violin, the same as they might want to play bluegrass on the violin, they could play Baroque violin. And the thing about a conservatory like that is that they often have, and still do, large collections of old instruments.
Mhm.
Uh, they have Baroque violins, they have Baroque bows, the real thing. And so
Right.
sometimes students will be taking out an 18th century bow to practice on. And then, of course, this inspires instrument makers to copy them so that they are more affordable. Uh, Baroque flutes crack quite easily, so but you could get somebody to make you a new one, plays just as well, because they
Uh,
were new instruments back when they were played in the 18th century. So that's just fine. Uh,
sure.
some of them you don't want to play because they're made of ivory and they would crack. Plus, you don't, ivory's not so good these days.
Yeah. Uh, so you were a very hot shot flutist. You played, I think you played that famous recording of Creation. I think that has that, the
It wasn't a,
chaos.
I didn't play in the recording, but I there was Sir Roger Norrington did a concert of it, and he was very, very annoyed with me and the clarinetist because we got the top reviews. He thought it should have been him. I mean, it was all fun, jokey, but I did make my first solo CD in 1976, I think, so 50 years ago. Um, Still got it here. I haven't listened to it for ages. With Chris playing uh, John Christian Bach. And we did, it was always great fun to get better on the flute, but I didn't feel that I was necessarily expressing what I wanted to do musically.
Mhm.
Uh, and there are people with better techniques, and the Bach sonatas, for example, are just incredibly hard. I was always terrified. I played them all, but I was always terrified. Similarly, playing the harpsichord, I'm never going to play the Goldberg variations, but I'm very happy to to jam along with anybody.
Yeah. And so is this how you made the transition from being a player to a conductor?
Well, I was always conducting.
Okay.
I went to one of the things they had in uh, Nottinghamshire, which is the town I spent my teenage years, is they had a Saturday morning music school. And so people would go to school during the week and then they go and have lessons all day Saturday. And they had an orchestra and they had a string orchestra. And I was the one person who didn't play a string instrument. So they said, well, you're completely useless. Why don't you come and conduct us so we don't get lost? So the first thing I ever conducted, I think, the first two pieces I ever conducted were the Mozart Divertimento Köchel 136 and Death and Metamorphosen by Richard Strauss.
Yeah. Oh my
I was
God.
18.
That's contrast right there. So,
Quite a contrast.
uh,
And then all the way through university, I was conducting as well. Uh, some of which was quite extraordinary experiences. I mean, I remember doing the Ravel G major piano concerto with Vlado Perlmutter, and he showed me his score, which was entirely covered in marks from Ravel.
it's just
And of course,
just
I got to work with some seriously great conductors. I mean, the most treasured memory of my university years was playing first flute in The Dream of Gerontius with Benjamin Britten conducting. So I was sitting right in front of him.
and he was
And
quite a musician, wasn't he? I mean, he was
he was probably the best one I've ever met. Plus, of course, that he was very, very quiet. He was a very quiet man. He never raised his voice. And Peter Pears was singing the tenor part, and he had came over to Cambridge for six rehearsals. It was absolute heaven.
that must
Uh,
have been, I mean, just incredible.
and
Incredible.
It was absolutely wonderful. Um, so that sort of thing you never forget.
I,
The
I
highs of music making like that.
I imagine, as a conductor, and like the program that our friends who are here will hear with you in a little more than a week's time, you often lead from the keyboard. What changes when the conductor is sort of physically inside the sound like that?
Well, first of all, it's chamber music. So one of the things that's very important is that if I'm accompanying a singer, for example, is the singer's in charge.
Right.
I would make comments, for example, if I think bring out if it's a jokey one, maybe if you did it this way, the joke in the words might come out, or if it's a really old thing in some old English or something, I might know how to pronounce it. But my job is to accompany the singer to make to make chamber music, uh, sitting down rather than standing up at a podium and telling people what to do.
Mhm.
Because back then, back in the 70s, conducting was much more of a dictatorship than it is now, especially in Germany and places. You know, the
Mhm.
conductor would be Lord Maestro, and you don't answer back. You don't ask questions as to why do you do it this way. You just do what you're told, and everybody is Mr. So and so, Miss So and so, rather than Chuck and Bubbles or whatever you want to call them.
Right. Right. And you had a good bit of opera experience in Germany. How did that shape your idea of being a conductor and the music of Handel and
Well,
those sorts of things?
yeah. Well, before that, straight out when I was at Oxford, I was working with uh, a bunch of musicians and stage directors, and we worked at the Lycée Français in London, and
Mm.
so we were doing Philidor and the Divin de Village and all the sort of things that Opera Lafayette actually does. Uh, and then we'd take them to a country house and do them in the ballroom, and that was great fun. Uh, sort of private performances, and I would conduct those sometimes from the keyboard, sometimes actually conducting. And then I did opera when I was at Cambridge. I did Philidor's Tom Jones and so on. Uh, and then I got into opera by playing it, and sometimes being someone's assistant. I was Charles Mackerras's assistant on an Hippolyte Haïti, which we did in Athens as well as London. And then I ended up recording the flute part uh, at for Jean-Claude Malgoire, and we did it in Covent Garden and in Paris. So that was fun. I assisted John Elliott Gardner also on Hippolyte at Aix-en-Provence. Uh, so it's lovely to get to know, to be an assistant like that. I've never been a consistent conductor for concerts, only for opera. And then Charles Mackerras, the first two recordings I ever made, uh, the first conductor uh, had a skiing accident and broke his right arm. So I had to take over that recording, which was a Rameau piece. And then the second time, Charles Mackerras lost his voice. He couldn't rehearse, so he asked me to take over, which I did, and I made that recording too. Uh, so I made sure I don't ski, so nobody else gets that chance, in case you were thinking. Uh, but
Uh,
we can all lose our voice. So if I lose my voice next week, you're playing. Okay.
I guess so. The, um, I just want to remind our audience that's listening in. If you have any questions, you can feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will get to them at the end of our program this evening. Also, just a plug. We're talking with Nic McGegan, and he's going to be leading our program Queen of Hearts, February 12th in DC and the 14th in New York. It all comes with excellent wine and cocktails, and you can get more information at operalafayette.org. Before we talk about the program, this is a program that has both sort of wine and music. And when we talked about the initial beginning of this, I think that I know that you are, in addition to being an amazing and inspiring musician, you also like have food and travel and wine and hospitality as just the center of your being. Um, you've called yourself like a gastronaut, and your upcoming program with Opera Lafayette like mixes some of these loves. So, like, what do music and wine have in common for you?
I was going to say, what don't they? Uh, if music be the food of love is the first song we do, so it's also got a little bit of Valentine's Day in there. But I think living well and enjoying it, and I wouldn't say I'm a connoisseur. I like good wine. I wouldn't say I know that much about it. Um, but living out here in the Bay Area, of course, I know people who grow the grapes and make the wine. I've even trod the grapes a couple of times. It's a great way to get extremely cold feet, let me tell you. You think it's nice and warm and it's not. And you get quite sore by the end of it. But so it's nice to, I know people who make champagne, for example. It's lovely. Uh, and I know cooks, uh, chefs, are generally some of the most fun people around. Not the ones you see in television who shout at you all the time, but the good ones, uh, the nice ones. It's all part of living well. Um, and yes, I do love all that. And one thing that's also, which you haven't mentioned in the program, which I should mention, is just poetry. I grew up reading a lot of poetry, and I'm a voracious reader. And so I'm actually going to be reading some poems in between the music, which uh, sort of to the uh, add to the themes, as it were, of music, love, uh, and good living. And love,
So
of course, doesn't always go right. So sometimes it's you know uh, the path of true love never did run smooth. So sometimes it's people who don't get what they want, but then write about it beautifully.
well, and we have actually emailed out your program notes to everyone who is on this call. The program is on the website with all the texts, and we will have a note in the program. You'll be talking about it during the show. But I mean, it this is at its heart a sort of rat packy evening of cabaret that has like as its content songs from the 17th and 18th century. I mean, do you think that this is a natural home for this sort of music?
Oh, I think totally. I mean, Henry Purcell, who was one of the main composers that we're dealing with, he wrote about 300 songs uh, to be sung in bars, the texts of which uh, would cannot be mentioned. They have every conceivable word that would make your great aunt blush, and are absolutely very, very naughty. In fact, the only time I've ever been able to perform one without anybody laughing at all was in Japan, where I found three girls who didn't speak enough English to sing it without knowing what it meant. We were all on the floor. We sort of explained afterwards why it was so funny, but that was, but we're not going that route. No one needs to bring earplugs for this. But a lot of the songs, we think of 17th century people, 18th century people as looking lovely. They've got beautiful clothes made of silk, and at least the rich ones did, nice wigs and everything else. But, the wigs weren't that clean. There was no dry cleaning, and their minds were just as dirty as everybody else's. So, actually, the songs are, some of them are quite raunchy.
Yeah, I mean, I
Uh,
think so. I mean, this program that you've built for us is just, I mean, it's just stunning in its breadth. I mean, English, French, Italian, and it's about love, but it's like witty and aching and bawdy and tender, and there's also some ridiculousness in there.
Oh,
So
I
when
think so.
you,
I think everybody. It's all human life is there basically. It's a little sort of like the National Enquirer, um, and these people lived. They lived. They loved. They lost. They did things to excess, uh, and uh, they wrote about it beautifully. And they did song, but they weren't. I mean, prudery, in my view, is something very much of the 19th century rather than the 18th century and the 17th century, in much the same way as Shakespeare had to be edited by the Reverend Bowdler so that it could be read by Victorian families because it was thought to be just too naughty and to mention things that you're not supposed to talk about. But then in the 19th century is the era when of course, they put cloths around the piano legs because the leg that showing anything with a leg was considered a bit naughty, even a piano.
this is so crazy. I mean, so
Which
I mean,
and that's true, by the way.
this is just it's nuts to think of. And but the texts that you've put on this program are sometimes shockingly direct.
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
do you think that this time period of music is more emotionally honest than we expect it to be?
I think so. It is bawdy. It is down to earth. People uh, had no compunction about swearing, for example. Um, that for that the swearing actually is the least of what's in these poems. They're all the language is all pretty clean, but the sentiments are not necessarily so. And of course, the one thing one does have to be a little cautious about is that nearly all the poetry is written by men, and so their idea of a girl making love for the first time is they considered to be funny rather than what it might have been, which was traumatic.
Right.
So, but there are a couple of things which take the opposite view. We have some songs uh, where the girl fights back, for example. We have, and it's mostly it's kind of city lovemaking. There's a little bit of what you might call Arcadian lovemaking, shepherds, nymphs and shepherds, uh, in that sort of Arcadian way where the sheep are completely self-service and the nymphs and shepherds just make love all day. Uh, and don't seem to need to earn money either, which of course is completely wrong. Uh, and they wear beautiful clothes and swan around like they do in a Fragonard or Boucher painting or Watteau. Uh, that's we've got a bit of that, but not much. Most of it is much more direct and much more. Uh, uh, and I love the ones actually where the the guy, for example, does not get the gal. There's two of them in there. One where the woman is only interested in knitting, and the and the other one where she's more interested in her lap dog.
Sometimes these are better investments. So,
Yeah, yeah, they last longer too. So the Forlorn Chaps one, and we're lucky that James Reese has a great sense of humor, and so does Maya Karani, who'll be singing. That they'll put these on semi-stage, so that people aren't going to sit there and say, "Well, I'd like to, I want to know. I need a PhD to understand this." Uh, just you probably need another drink to
so,
get the full thing
so
of it.
what, I mean, from this program, pick out some of your favorites that people can look forward to. What are the gems that I mean, they're all, but what are the gems in your estimation that people should be looking forward to in this program?
Well, we have two pieces of music by Claudio Monteverdi, who's of course just one of the great composers of all time. Um, one of which is a nymph and shepherd, uh, or the shepherdess, I should say. She's ruling the roost. She's saying, "How much do you love me? Do you love me enough? Really? I don't believe you." She's teasing him like anything. And the other one is a love duet, but it's sung by two of the most ghastly people who ever existed, the Emperor Nero and his Empress Poppaea. And you have to forgive them because, they've killed just about everybody else on stage, and they sing about how much they love to each other to the most gorgeous music. And, uh, some of the Purcell is lovely. And again, as you say, often very direct. One of the songs, for example, is Sweeter Than Roses was the first kiss.
Mhm.
And that is just very direct. And he sets it absolutely and the end line is, "What magic hath victorious love?" I mean, that is just beautiful.
It's,
Uh,
it's just,
and then there's, of course, the funny ones. There's a lovely one right at the beginning where this teenage girl, she'd now send a text, but it just sort of says, "Oh, that I had but a fine man, a dainty man, a delicate man, and a spicy one." For now I lie all myself by myself all alone, and the cold sweat comes me upon, and alack, from my love I die. Well, if I die, I die. I mean, you can just imagine that being sung by a 14-year-old.
it's remarkable.
And
Remarkable.
it's not at all, it's not high art at all.
Uh, Talk about some.
But
You have a few air de cour, some French pieces on here.
yes, yeah, those are more sophisticated. One of the things that's uh, D'Amboise is in there, which is a song which Jimmy Reese sings beautifully. A lot of the songs, and there's a whole genre of this, uh, is about uh, making love, but make sure you don't hang about. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. Uh, don't wait because youth is fleeting. So there is that always that sense that you mustn't wait too long. There's a poem I would love to read, which is called "To His Coy Mistress," but it's too long, saying had we but world enough in time, we could have discussed how we make love till the end of time, but we don't. So
Mm.
let's get on with it now. And of course, this is an era when uh, you could you could die the following day of a disease now that for which we would take a pill. So life was much more uncertain. It's a bit like the sort of atmosphere that happened, say, in London during the Second World War. Couples would get together knowing that a bomb could land on them the following day, and that would be that.
Right.
Or that the boyfriend would go off to war and never come home. Uh, so it's that kind of urgency is always in there, sometimes very poignantly and sometimes just amusingly. So it is, there's all that aspect to it. And then the happiness and sometimes the misery that, or the pining for lost love.
Mhm.
Uh, all human life is there just as it it was then and it is now.
Yeah. As you said before, you have chosen to actually read some poetry during this program, which are also very run the gamut in terms of emotion. What was how did how did you sort of whittle down the poetry that you were going to include in this program?
It, well, it took it. I really like this one, but that's too long. I mean, the one I really wanted to read again is too long, where uh, a man is, but it would get it's just got the best line in it when it's called "To His Mistress on Going to Bed," and he's slowly taking her clothes off. This is by John Donne. And then finally, when she's just about naked, he says, absolutely amazed by it. And he says, "Oh, my America, my newfound land, my kingdom best with one man manned." Which gets a good laugh in America, of
Yeah.
course. Uh, but that poem sadly is too long. But I could provide a book list of others. It's very, very difficult. I wanted to read whole poems rather
Mm.
than just verses. I may miss the odd verse out. Some cases I have to because it's really too raunchy, even for a Washingtonian audience, uh, or uh, too abstruse, shall we say, to going on about mythology or something like that. But so I'm choosing rather short poems, and and they're mostly 17th century. I've snuck one 20th century one in at the end, just as for a laugh. But they're all short, and I love reading. I'm a closet actor, I guess you could say, and I love reading poetry, and British poetry is kind of in my bloodstream, basically.
Yeah. You are, for this program, joined by two rising stars of the American early music scene, Jimmy Reese and Maya Karani. I believe you've worked with Jimmy before. That's right.
Oh yes, we've worked several times. We've recorded together. I did a Messiah tour just before Christmas, 4 weeks of Messiah. He was on 1 week of that, but I knew him at Yale when he was just a kiddywink. And Maya actually lives in the Bay Area too, and we've already rehearsed. And I even cooked for her, so made her lunch.
Uh,
So that's good fun.
that's great. Yeah, they're both they're both. I think bring a lot of joy to their performance. It's very palpable in their performance that they love what they do.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Well,
uh,
I think I mean the whole point of this program is it is, if you like, a divertissement of some kind. I'm told that the audience won't be sitting in serried ranks. They'll be sort of uh, at
Tables
tables
and
with wine, or
yes.
just as they would have been in the 17th and 18th century. And so it'll be a very relaxed atmosphere, I hope. And so it's a good way to do these songs rather than to sort of dress them up and put them in a concert hall and make sure everyone wears a suit and a long dress and looks terribly formal.
Uh,
This is how they would have been performed, like chamber music, practically in a living room.
and probably with a lot of response back and forth from the audience. I mean, I think we're probably much better, much more polite audiences than they were at the time.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. You were asking me earlier about playing. One of the things how I learned to play continuo was I used to play in a pub in London called the Pinder of Wakefield, which was for out of work actors, and I would play their pantomime every year, and they would show up. The actors would show up with music or without, and I would have to accompany their songs. And one of them said, I've got this song, it's in E flat, but I'd like to sing it in A, and I can you put in 32 bars in the middle because I want to do a tap dance in football boots. We don't have time to rehearse and you just have to play. And
Yeah.
that's an incredibly good uh, training um, for sort of doing cabaret piano, but that's continuo basically, because I don't think none of these songs is the right hand of the harpsichord part written out. I have to make it up.
Yeah.
Where there are violin parts, that's different. They are written out, but they'll be noodling away and putting extra ornaments in.
A lot of your time is spent when you are not performing is actually spent teaching young people who are coming up in this tradition. Um, what as you meet like the next generation of players and singers, um, what surprises you most about how things have changed from when you were coming up in this music?
Well, first of all, how technically assured they are. some of the violinists, for example, at the J415, which is Juilliard's Baroque Orchestra, uh, could be in the top professionals, and they are the teacher. They are taught by the top professionals, so the mantle has been passed on remarkably quickly. Um, that is terrific, and in places like that, of course, they often have access to great instruments, which is good. Uh, Singers, it's a different matter, but the thing with singers is that if they like this sort of music and want to sing it, it's usually because they can and they're very good at it, as opposed to the sort of, shall we say, the sort of lady opera singer who would wear a tiara and only wear a $10,000 dress and sing uh, grand stuff. There's grand stuff in the 18th century, but there's also this. So it's like somebody who could sing opera, but also could sing Porgy and Bess and maybe sing something from the American Songbook, because
Yeah.
a lot of these songs are the Baroque equivalent of the American Songbook.
I
They're
mean,
very simple tune with lots of verses. So it's a question and a chorus. In one case, we've got a chorus where I'm expecting the audience to join in. They
I,
don't know it yet, but they do now.
I'm going to move on. I have some good questions here that are that are waiting for us. But before we do that, I have one final question, which is: are there any misconceptions about early music and period performance that you'd love to retire for good?
I think the idea that we really know how they performed it, uh, absolutely know how they performed it. First of all, with singers, we've only got descriptions of singers. We don't have a larynx preserved in formaldehyde in a bottle. We can't reconstitute it. We also, if somebody says, Bach liked his allegros like this, or we can't say, well, he might have liked that on April the 23rd, but maybe he went somewhere else on April the 24th and he thought differently. No performance. Performance is a living art, and you can't fix it like a butterfly in a museum. It flies still, and so it can be different from day to day. An audience can affect how someone performs, so you can get some idea of, for example, dance tempos. Uh, when I was growing up, a minuet was danced so slowly that it was basically done by sloths. You couldn't possibly dance to it. And then dance historians have come along and say, well, it probably went like this because we've got blood pulses. Someone said it's 60 pulses a minute or whatever it is. And you try dancing the steps and they're all written down. And so you can say, well, maybe a minuet should be a lot faster. You can't be dogmatic about it, but you can at least have a better idea. But you can't be fixed in all of that. Uh, it's and then if you can make a case for something, then that's great. It doesn't have to be somebody else could do it completely differently. In fact, it should be completely different. Otherwise, it's not personal to you. So I think the idea that it's somehow authentic.
Mhm.
Uh, we, how big was Bach's orchestra? To which the answer is he got as many people as he had money for. It doesn't mean it's what he wanted.
Right. I mean, we,
But
as he was definitely anyone who's ever been a choir master knows that it is the art of the possible.
it is the
So,
art of the possible. But that maybe is not the art of the ideal.
right.
And I think the
Exactly.
idea that people went back thinking, oh, this period instrument stuff is going back to some ideal. Well, it's not. You can do simple things. You can say, well, at a particular place at a particular time, Mozart had this number of people in the orchestra, and he sat them like this.
Mhm.
Well, that's very helpful, but there's almost no concert hall in America that's the same size as one of Mozart's. They're all two or three times bigger. So is that right? Or should you make an orchestra bigger to fit a bigger space? Mozart would have done.
Yeah.
Uh, so is the place boomy or is it very dry? That affects how fast you perform it, how the diction goes.
Mhm.
Uh, Ornaments, which are the things that the composer doesn't write down, that the singer was supposed to, or instrumentalist was supposed to invent, and there's a whole school for learning how to do that, are of course totally transitory. As my friend Robert Levin used to say, if you don't like what I just played, don't worry, you'll never hear it again.
That's great.
Which is more or less like going to a jazz concert. You cannot fix a jazz concert.
Yeah.
Uh, and I feel that that whole thing has actually had a very liberating aspect to more modern music and to modern orchestras as well. I've have orchestras, modern players now who say, "Oh, can I put some extra trills in here?"
Mm.
Sure, you can. You know, another thing that's fascinating is that we can do performance practice the other way around, and I just did this. Uh, is music from about 120 years ago. We have recordings. So I was just doing Elgar's First Symphony, and I went back to Elgar's own performance, which has all sorts of stuff that's not in the score. So you can say, well, the composer did that, and I think you can assume that if that's the case with a composer like that, a couple of hundred years earlier, when there's nothing particular in the score about how to perform it, they did all kinds of things that we don't know about. And I think now we're a lot freer than we used to be, and that freedom is always a good thing.
Well, I mean, certainly you have a freedom and an adventurousness, whether you're in front of a period instrument orchestra or in front of a modern orchestra. And I've always I've sat in your rehearsals, and I've really, it's a really inspiring thing to watch just how much investigation you have, even when you've done something hundreds of times, that you were willing to investigate a new way.
People are
Um,
always, if you're doing it with a different orchestra, different chorus, they're different. So you don't
yeah.
do the same thing. I don't think a microwave should go anywhere near classical music or modern music, or for that matter. Uh, you can't Milli Vanilli lip sync a performance to make it like it never was.
Yeah. Well,
It's a living art, and the two performances that we'll give in about 10 days' time, I hope will be completely different. People will laugh in different places. The second one will probably, people will learn, oh, well, that little joke worked, that little joke didn't. So we'll, you know, tweak it a bit.
yeah. Um,
There's also a difference between wine and cocktails in New
yeah.
York. The cocktails are stronger. They may be on the floor before we perform.
Yes. Well, just a few things from our audience. This is not a question, but Marilyn Gleason says, "I'm 83 and grew up on the recordings heard by these groups just mentioned by McGegan. Thank you so much for talking about them," and points out that on the point of historical practice of historical instruments, the movement also influenced other music from other cultures, ancient instruments from Asia, particularly China, seven-string silk zither, that are collected in music. That movement also influenced other cultures to look back on their own.
That's a
Um,
very good point. And I think that's also, you can see in places like Harvard, there are a lot of ethnomusicologists in the music department now. Um, Here in Berkeley, we have a gamelan. Terrific. Uh, and people who talk about, you know, we did a concert once of music about the time that San Francisco was founded, which is about 1776. Music from 1776, not only from Europe, but some stuff from here. And then we had a Chinese classical musician come along and play stuff that was going on in China at the same time.
it's remarkable.
Fabulous. Fabulous.
Fabulous. Um, a question: did the format of this concert allow you to program material you love but don't often get to perform?
Very much so. Uh, Very often a voice recital, for example. Um, you do a couple of Handel arias, you might do a couple of Purcell songs, you go on to Schubert and later music. This A concert that has a theme like this enables you to take music that wouldn't normally be performed together, but it's all unified by the theme. So we have music from France, Italy, and a lot from England, plus poetry, all on the theme of love, falling into it and falling out of it, combined with a bit of good living. That provides the program, really.
Right. Uh, uh, and then a final question. Actually, this is a very good one, which is this sounds like it's a different type of program than we're used to. Um, should we get dressed up? What is Nick wearing, so that perhaps we can take our attire from him. Uh,
I will be wearing a tuxedo, which is completely wrong, of course, but it's nice to travel with. If it gets really hot, I'll just wear a shirt. But I won't be wearing a period wig, and I don't have period glasses. So uh, if you want to dress up, that's absolutely fine. Just make sure you don't get wine on your lace. But
how,
people, but definitely don't wear a suit,
yeah.
and don't. I mean, what we decided that we would be uh, very, very elegant, but not formal.
Okay. That's great. I think that's great. A great help for the audience. Well,
Well,
Nick,
also, I have to say that the
yeah,
guys, I decided for the guys that, a bit like Fred and Ginger, we would wear black and white so the ladies can wear wonderful colors.
yes, that's very chivalrous of you.
Yeah.
So, um, well, Nick, this has been such a pleasure. You're generous and funny and full of insight. So, thank you very much for being with us this evening.
It's a
Uh,
great pleasure. And I was going to suggest one thing
sure.
that none of we performers, should leave the stage after the concert. Do come and say hello, come
Yes.
and chat, whether you've been on this podcast or not. But it's not going to be like a formal concert where we end, you bow, you clap, we bow, and you never see us again. We are
Yeah.
going to come out because you might be having a glass of wine or a cocktail during the show, but we won't.
Not
So
until
we've got
then.
some we'll have some catching up to do, and we'd like to do it in your good company.
Well, thank you all for spending part of your evening with us. Again, we'd love to see you in person at Queen of Hearts, February 12th in Washington, D.C., at St. Francis Hall with wines curated by Sarah Thompson, and February 14th on Valentine's Day in New York City at the Georgia Room with bespoke cocktails by Alex Dominguez. Full details and tickets are at operalafayette.org. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nick, and look forward to seeing you in a few days. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.